Hello, and welcome to Sorrel's Project Management Times, the podcast which looks into the ins and outs of the project management world. Disclaimer, all opinions in this podcast are those of the people involved and not of any organisations they are affiliated with. If you want to find out more, please go to our website, pmtimes.co.uk, where you can access my CV and career coaching packages. But for now, let's get on with the show. So this week I'm talking to Elizabeth Harrin. Hi Elizabeth.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show.
And thanks for coming. Let's start off. Your degree's in English. How did you go from that to becoming a project manager?
That's an interesting question. I did a degree in what I thought would be interesting. You've got to spend 3 years doing it, haven't you? So I loved English. I loved reading, writing and all that stuff and literature. So it was a natural thing for me to spend my time doing. And I had no idea what I wanted to do as a job. So I ended up getting into project management because after my degree, there was the milk round with the big companies interviewing people and doing assessment centres. I did a couple of those and spectacularly bombed out some of them. But I learned a lot through the interview process. So by the time I got to a bit further through interviewing with these big companies, I did a really good interview with American Express and they offered me this job on their training scheme. So I did their graduate training scheme, which was different placement in a number of different corporate departments. And I just ended up being assigned the project management team for 3 months. And it was just an eye-opener because I went, wow, this is actually a job because nobody knows. Well, so maybe it's different now, I think, because project management is more common as a degree topic in its own right. Mm-hmm. But when I was studying, there wasn't that awareness that project management was an actual career. Yes. And so it wasn't until I saw people doing it, I thought, that is ticking boxes, telling other people what to do, being organised, making lists. I love it.
Yeah, being bossy, making lists, organising things. And then suddenly I found project management as well. And it's that, that's perfect.
What's not to love about it? It fitted. So I think a lot of people end up doing project management by accident because they do, a line job or they're a software engineer or something. And then suddenly they're asked to take on more responsibility and manage projects. But I suppose I'm one of the people who chose it and thought, now I know it exists. When this graduate training scheme finishes, that's the area that I want to pursue. So I did, and I ended up doing projects from then on.
Wow. So you're a proper, pure project manager through and through, really?
I suppose so. I suppose so. I think I'm a rebel project manager, really.
Oh, brilliant. So what sort of industries have you worked in so far?
I've worked in, American Express is financial services. So I started off in financial services and did that for quite a long time, actually. And I moved from American Express to another insurance company and I worked abroad for a bit with them. And then transitioned into healthcare. And the reason I ended up doing that is because the recruitment agency didn't understand what area of the business I was applying for, and they thought I would be applying for a different area, which would be more sort of financial. And then I went to the interview, and it was not that at all. But healthcare is such an interesting area. I'm glad that they messed up really and didn't brief me particularly well or understand what their client wanted. Because I ended up in healthcare technology. Mm-hmm. I suppose even in financial services, I've always done a lot of things in IT. So I've always been more sort of IT, but on the business change side. So rather than sort of leading a technical team, I've always kind of got involved with how do we get users to actually use this stuff, that kind of hybrid change manager, business project manager thing. And I love healthcare. It's so interesting because it's so easy to see how what you do affects the end user, the patients. And that's much harder to see in insurance, where basically you're designing products and launching software and you make money because people don't use your product at the end of the day.
Yes,
you don't want them to claim on the insurance, really, do you? but in healthcare, I worked on a project where we put new computers into theatres, into operating theatres, and if they break, people have their operations cancelled, and that is it's a clear driver to get it right first time, because you can't mess this stuff up when there's that level of disruption to people's lives.
I think, because I was going to ask, do you spend a lot of time sort of in clinical areas? I don't know what the exact term is, sort of with doctors and nurses and things.
Not so much now, but I have done. I have worked on projects that have been very clinical, hospital-led, and I've spent a lot of time working in hospitals. And it's quite strange to see it from the other side, because to go in and not be a patient and to go through the doors that say staff only and things like that, it's kind of like going behind the scenes, which I find quite exciting.
Yeah.
But no, I think these days we try to do a lot of things virtually, and we try to make use of subject matter experts where we can. I think all businesses are trying to do more with less, aren't they? So we're looking at more inventive ways that mean people don't have to go out and travel the country so much. So do you find that in the companies that you work with, that more and more work is being done virtually?
Yes, I think to get sort of the expertise, I see that we end up getting sort of contractors in different places and people all over the country. But in the defence industry, it's already very office-based anyway. So it's another sort of industry where you are a little bit displaced from your product when you're working on the bigger programs. And I work a lot in the sort of the IT side and the the mission systems. So a lot of it is working with IT guys, programmers, and things like that as they develop things. So we end up in the same office a lot of the time. So
I think it is. I think it is easier to work with people when they're in the same office. But what I've been finding recently is that because when I'm in the office, there's a lot of people to see and talk to, I'm actually not very. I'm productive, but it's a different type of productivity.
Yes.
It's not networking even, because that makes it sound like it's something that's not my job. But talking to people, all right, just see you, let me chase up on that action. Well, actually, you've given me an idea, let me talk to Claire now, because we're just all here in the same building. But actually, when I'm working at home, I can have a to-do list, and I can say, now I will just sit here and do that task, dial into that conference call. And I seem to get through more stuff when I'm at home.
Yeah.
But you're oiling the machine when you're in the office with other people. I suppose you need a mix of both.
Yeah, I think it worked really well. The job I was on last year, a lot of people work from home on a Friday. And that was definitely the get stuff done day, where you sort of all the admin side, data entry, writing up forms or documents, that happened on a Friday. But Monday to Thursday, everyone there wasn't that much working from home, so most people were in the office. And I agree, it was sort of it is a sort of networking, but it's networking with your own team. It's those casual conversations where you go, I'm having a real trouble with this, and someone else goes, I had trouble with that last month. If you do this thing, it'll be better.
It's different ways of working, and it's getting that right, and getting that understanding of your team and how your team works and where you work well and where you work differently, I think is so important. And you get that from that face-to-face interaction. Because I know I'm going to preempt something we're going to talk about a bit later, but that is where conflict comes from.
Yes.
If you are getting it wrong, whether you're working at home or whether you're working in the office, if those relationships aren't there, and if you don't read the room right, and things are starting to go awry, it all starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
So it is important to have those conversations.
I suppose also the phases of the project. I think you do need a bit more face time towards the sort of planning phases and earlier phases. But once the project sort of gets going, quite often... But then again, once the project gets going, everyone's busy, but actually you need to sort of create those opportunities for people to talk. Otherwise, they might forget to.
Exactly, and we're finding this at the moment. We're in the implementation phase of the project that I'm working on, and everyone's just off doing their own thing, which is great. I trust them all to do what they need to do, but every so often it's just nice to say, have you talked to, oh yes I have, but did you talk about, oh no, not that particular point, oh that didn't come up, oh well, go off then. Just push you back in the right direction, just join up. And I think project managers often find that it's quite hard. I find a lot of my job is quite hard to quantify what I do, because aside from the the monthly project board report and type up some minutes, a lot of what I'm doing is being the glue in the team to try to make sure that everyone's talking the way that they should, so that if someone sounds like they've got an issue over here, that the people over there also know about it, and that we talk about it together, because the answer might affect more than just the person who raised it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people don't understand that what they're raising actually is a bigger issue that perhaps the sponsor needs to know about. So it's listening. A lot of it is just listening and trying to plug the gaps.
You need to sort of know all the different parts to a level. And I suppose that's quite interesting from two directions, because firstly, as a contractor, I think a lot about the worth I'm giving to the project. I want to be worth the money they're spending on me. But also internally, that you getting that job satisfaction. And I think sometimes I forget the value I'm giving, and I'm sitting there going, today all I've done is one report and nothing else. But actually I've spoken to 20 different people, and those little micro interactions have helped the project move along.
Yes. And I think we often underestimate that. Whether you're a contract role or whether you're in an employed position, most of what we're doing is greasing the wheels and making it so that our teams can do their best job, do their best work, because we're removing the roadblocks, helping them join the dots. Yeah, but it's so hard to explain that to other people. I think when you say, well, what have I done at the end of the day? Well, pretty much nothing. I can't tangibly say I've achieved anything today, but actually, everyone around me is working perfectly well, and that's how I know that I've been successful.
Yes. Yeah. So going back to your degree, you've got an English degree. What other qualifications have you done, and where do you get your sort of project management information?
Well, I did a master's degree as well, but I did that in children's literature, so that helped me not at all in my degree.
It helps you spread. It helps you spread information in a sort of not simplistic. That's the wrong word. In a easy to read way for different stakeholders.
Yes, I suppose. Where do I get my project management information? Well, I do try and listen into what is happening in the industry. So I'm a Prince 2 practitioner. I've done my APM qualification, the one before it got renamed.
Yeah,
for
PMQ, APMP. Well, it's
that
now
one,
PMQ.
APMP, yes. And I did the Axelos, the program management qualification, and the one about P3O as well. All of these quite long ago in my career, so I can't remember the real titles of them. And to be honest, I feel that once you get to a certain point, experience counts for a lot more than the letters after your name. So I'd say if you're a new project manager, going out and doing some kind of formal training helps open the doors, because it's a tick in the box on your CV when you're going for a job. But actually there'll come a point where you know this stuff so much that you don't really have to look at your Prince 2 manual to remind yourself of what to do in any point in the project. But I think the qualification I'm most proud of is becoming a fellow of APM, because I work with a lot of people who have PhDs, who have MBAs, and while I'm very proud of my degrees, it's not project management, it's not even management. So to put together the portfolio of evidence and to go through the fellowship application process was quite hard work, but very rewarding, because then I feel like I've got something that's worthy. And I think joining a professional body, whether you choose APM or something else, PMI, or wherever you happen to be in the world, whatever your local group is, that's a really good way of getting information about the industry. And support as well, because they all have events. A lot of them will do sort of study groups or special interest groups. So if you're particularly interested in scheduling, there's a scheduling special interest group. If you're particularly interested in IT, there's the British Computer Society has which is the Chartered Institute for IT. They have a project management specialist group. So there's lots of ways that you can tap into the professional bodies, and many organisations will pay for your membership as well. So if you're already employed, you can talk to your employer about whether they'll pay your annual membership fee, and they may well be more likely to do that than to pay for you to go on a course, because it's a lot cheaper to buy a 1-year membership than it is to pay £1,000 or whatever it is to do a 5-day Prince 2 training course. So that might be an interesting conversation to have with employers if you want to get access to a whole load of experts, industry knowledge, the magazines as well. The professional bodies all have industry magazines that are available online, or you get print copies, or you get access to journals. And there's events. I feel like I'm being very passionate about this, but I've learned so much from connecting with my peers through through professional bodies,
Yes.
especially those where they offer you online training, because I know we've talked a bit about being virtual and working from home and all, not being in the office every day. And there was a point where I was in London every day, and the British Computer Society has events pretty much once a week that you could go to, and they're all amazing. And then I had kids and I'm in London less, and it means that actually now I'm enjoying participating more in webinars and watching recordings. And the technology is there to enable us to do that now. So, a lot of conferences are live streamed and things like that. So professional bodies and the groups and the meetings and the special interest areas, I would say, would be a great place to start to get loads of knowledge about project management.
So I've already done an episode about becoming a full member of the APM, the second episode in the series. And then, so fellowship is the next level along, but is more about how you've, becoming a full member is more about the knowledge you've gained and what you've done, whereas fellowship is more about showing what you've given back to the profession.
Yes, it is.
So you've done that, so you're quite involved with the APM. And I think I've talked quite a lot about this on the podcast because I'm a member of the APM, but I'm not actually a member of the PMI yet. Would you be able to give us a little bit more about what sort of things they do?
I think actually they're very similar in what they offer in terms of networking and events. They have, but I think they are more, well, in my experience, I've been to their events in the States and I've been to their events in the UK. Their UK events, they have a big flagship conference called Synergy in London, but they also do events in the north of England as well, and there are sort of local things too. But their presence in the UK is much smaller than it would be if you were in New York or something like that. So to go to one of the big North America Congress, or even the European congresses that they do, because I've spoken at that event too, where you've got sort of 500, 2,000 project managers in a room, it's amazing to be with that group of international people who are all struggling with the same thing that you are. So I'd say in terms of what they offer as a member, I get a magazine, I get access to online forums and things through the website, and I get their online resources.
They are very different organisations because obviously the PMI is American and the APM is English, and the PMI is more global, really, isn't it?
Yes, I think if you are an international project manager or you want to work as an expat, or you have visions that the States is where you want to base your career, then PMI will be more recognised, and their set of qualifications will be more recognised on your CV than if you had PMQ like I've got, or Prince 2. But so it very much depends on where you are in the world, I think, as to which is the most sensible project management group to join. I'm a member of both because of being a fellow, and because I think APM is a really warm group to be part of. But PMI published one of my books, so I feel like I need to keep one foot in that camp as well. And they do know how to put on a good conference.
So you mentioned your publications. Do you want to tell us what information you've been spreading?
What information I've been
That's
spreading?
An awful way of putting it.
That sounds like I'm giving people communicable diseases.
Shall I try that again? Those were not good words.
Project management. No, it's fine.
That's fine. Cool. Go
on. So, well, yes, I wrote my first book ages ago now, because I always wanted to write a book before I was 30, and I thought, actually, I don't know anything else apart from project management, so I better write about that. So I did, and I started my blog about the same time, and since then I've written a book every couple of years, so I'm up to 5 now, and I like the process. I mean, I'm a writer at heart. I like the process of writing and editing and having a book in my hands at the end. And I think it's a good way to get knowledge out there, and it's also a great way to learn. So I'm interviewing people or collecting case studies for a book, so I'm happy to be learning myself as I'm putting the material together. But again, for your listeners, another great place to look for learning about project management is to read, because you can go to the library. You don't have to buy books, although obviously I would very much appreciate it if you bought mine. But you can get them ordered from the library, or see if your PMO at work has a little collection of books to read. Or you can, our library has loads of ebooks that you can download. And there's so much great stuff out there. And I don't think, you won't go into like an airport WH Smith's and buy Managing the Urgent and Unexpected Project Management Guide that I can see on my shelf here, because they're not exactly that kind of populist book.
No.
But there are some really fascinating and interesting texts out there from very experienced researchers. They open up a whole different way of looking at project management.
Should we move on to today's competency?
Yes.
So we've decided to talk about the third competency, conflict management.
Da, da, da.
Drama, literally.
It is literally the drama.
So the way I've been doing it so far is I've been just sort of reading them and then we chat about them.
Okay, let's do that.
I'll read the first one out and we see where we get to. Again, as always, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 points, and when applying to be chartered, you only need to cover 4 of them. The first one is take a proactive approach to identify and address potential conflict situations which may impact on a project.
If you're putting your chartered application together, you've got to use real examples, haven't you? You want to be able to either talk if you're in the interview part or write about what it really means. So if you're taking a proactive approach to identifying and addressing potential conflict, this is just looking out for where conflict might happen. And so can you demonstrate the kinds of things that you would do to be proactive and to identify where conflict might happen? So I would suggest you're probably doing it without even noticing. And that's so much of this, all these competencies are things that you just do, and then someone says, can you justify it? Can you write it down? Like, oh, this is...
Yeah.
No.
This one seems really hard. I think I do this, but yeah, I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how I do it personally. Well,
things like you do stakeholder analysis on a project, and you're probably looking at conflicts between requirements, conflicts of expectation. So you're probably going, well, that person's expecting that requirement, that person expects something that's slightly different. That's a potential conflict that you would then work through. So your stakeholder analysis, stakeholder engagement activity would be one thing that you could use to say, this is how I'm proactive in identifying where conflict might be.
And that's going to the next stage, isn't it, really? Because you think of doing I personally think of doing a stakeholder analysis, and sometimes you only really just sort of roughly sort of talk about or write about what each person thinks or feels, or what their what their idea of the project is. But it is going that next step and comparing each person to each other almost.
That's the thing, because the interesting part about stakeholder engagement is not how they interact with you as an individual, it's how the whole dynamic works across the whole organisation, whole project organisation. And that's where it can get quite complicated. But you if you look for it, you will spot things that might be conflict or that might turn into conflict, and then you can stop them. And we'll come on to techniques for stopping later. But I think it's being aware of where conflict might come. So thinking about like the project life cycle, the things that might happen in the beginning of a project are around a conflict between requirements, things like that. Whereas when you're in the delivery phase, you'll be looking more at conflict of timescales or conflict between different resources being pulled in different directions, not being able to hit deadlines. So different points in the life cycle will have different flashpoints as well.
Yeah.
And it comes out through risk management too, because you'll be looking at your risks thinking, if I put mitigating actions in for this particular risk, it's going to upset this person, or there might be a conflict with the budget because we'll have to spend £10,000 to fix it. Do we want to? Do we not? 2 people are going to fight that out. So there's ways to look at, and this is all, I think this is a lot of stuff that we do reflexively, where you're not, because I think project managers are particularly good at understanding personal relationships. So this is just taking that to a level where you can articulate it and write it down. But thinking, even in just general life, thinking about what causes conflict. And I did some very informal asking a group of people, so I can't really call it research, but I did some thinking about what causes conflict in projects, and things like lack of clarity about roles, lack of respect, a blame culture, lack of strategic direction, lack of leadership, miscommunication, all this stuff came out. And that's all the bits about working with other people.
Yeah. Nobody
said, there's conflict because I want to use Microsoft Project and somebody else wants to use Liquid Planner. And nobody cares about that.
So those are the points really that so making sure there's communication and all those sort of things. Those are the things that practically when you're writing down your 250 words, you can say that you're actively making sure those things do happen. basically.
And that helps you to resolve potential conflict because you're minimizing the risk of miscommunication, which is a cause of conflict, because you're doing communication well. So you have a communication plan, which is a way of proactively preventing conflict from happening. So yes, it's exactly what you just said. I just repeated you.
And I suppose sometimes if it's bigger conflicts, you might it may be part of the risk plan, but then if it's only smaller things, that's probably not worth it.
I wouldn't put them all on the risk plan.
No.
I think sometimes, especially if your risk log is a public document, there might be some things that would be better not to be written down.
So this is one thing I've always thought about, sort of stakeholder plans, is that sort of that line between being very bland and just saying, well, this is this stakeholder and this is that stakeholder, and then you could get really like a teenager writing their diary going, well, such and such said this, and it's getting that line where it's professional. You may not want to share it too widely. It always confuses me.
I know what you mean. It's how much do you declare?
Yes.
And how much do you hold back?
And obviously you want it to be transferable. Like if you move on from the project, you'd like the next project manager to be able to take advantage of some of your insights, but you can't just tell them too much, if that makes sense.
Not in writing. I mean, if you trust the person, I think when you're doing a handover, you would want to tell them everything. But I get that there is a lot of things that don't get written down. And that's part of the politics of organisations, isn't it? Because if everybody worked beautifully well together and we were all the same and we all responded in the same way, apart from the fact that life would be very boring, there wouldn't be any need to have discrete corridor conversations. because you'd be able to predict how people behave. But the reality of life is we can't predict always how people will behave, and that's where you end up with your challenging situations at work, because it's people who stop projects. It's not the fact that you don't have a risk plan. It will be somebody standing up and saying, I don't agree with this, we're going to can this project. And that's where you want to try to avoid all the stuff that you're putting in place, all the good project management skills, all the things that you're doing to sort of remove the possibility that conflict might happen, so that you don't have someone throw their toys out of the pram.
Cool. So I think we've covered that point.
Okay.
The next one is take an impartial approach to investigating the cause of conflict. So this seems like an ethics question, really, a sort of along those lines.
Yes, I think it means taking the emotion out of the situation and feeling that you can address conflict by describing the situation and suggesting collectively what you could do about it. And I think if you're addressing this, if you choose that this is one of the topics that you want to write about, I think you're going to have to give an example of where you've done it to illustrate this, because it's quite hard to describe it without giving an example. So you might say, I noticed from the timesheets that so-and-so has been staying late every night because they're catching up on work, but I thought that other members of the team should be doing that work. I'm worried about the effect that might have on everybody. So perhaps we could look at rescheduling some of the project tasks. Let's redefine our joint responsibilities. Let's all contribute effectively. Obviously without the sarcastic undertones there. But you're just trying to describe the problem neutrally, rather than saying, and that person's doing all the work because the rest of your team's lazy, which might be what you feel. But actually, if you said that out loud, the team leader would instantly get their back up. And instead, you're saying very factually, without the emotion, the data is telling me this. Do you think that's okay? What can we do about it? Worried about the impact on everybody. Put my mind at rest that you've got this under control. And then there's no blame. Or if you do have to blame someone, it's always easier to diffuse the problem and blame yourself. So there's been plenty of situations where I've said, oh, that's my fault, thinking they messed up, but I am the project manager. I take the blame for it. I take the fall because it's my team.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's, it just takes the pressure off, doesn't it? So this being impartial is also not playing favourites. So like you say with the ethics thing, if you're investigating a cause of conflict, not only are you doing it in a very unemotional way, you're also doing it in a very fair way, not saying, well, I implicitly trust you because I've worked with you for 10 years, so you must be wrong. Taking both sides into account and being able to justify that and evidence that you've listened effectively to both.
And I suppose not going into it with preconceived
ideas.
That's it. And I suppose not going into it with preconceived ideas.
Yes, I think that's really important as well. But that's really hard. I mean, I think you're asking people to be superhuman, really, aren't you? Go in and be the perfect manager. And I think we have to do that because that's the professional thing to do. I think it's also helpful as a point of realism that you would not put on your chartered application, but you'd want to know that you had a safe space, probably outside of work, to vent about all this stuff, because if you're carrying the responsibility of dealing with conflict at work, it can be quite emotional for you too, and you need somewhere to let off steam. That might be your mentor, a trusted colleague in a different department, someone in your family, a close friend, down the pub on a Friday night. But if you do that, you're much more able to cope with having the professional veneer at work.
Yeah, definitely.
Do above board.
So the next one is about evaluating and implementing. It's evaluate and implement conflict management measures, including the role of colleagues and specialists.
I think for here, you'd be, you could use the sort of 5 conflict management techniques. So collaborating, compromising, smoothing, forcing, withdrawal. You might have come across those as the sort of standard way of dealing with different conflict, different approaches for managing conflict. And this, I think, you are being asked to say, how do you decide which conflict management tools to use? And I'll come to role of colleagues and specialists in a second, but so I might look at that and go, well, actually, in this situation where somebody's saying, I don't want to work on Friday, and I'm saying, actually, we've got loads of work to do, the easiest thing to do might be just to say, well, I'll compromise, you do Friday morning and take the afternoon off, because it might not be a very big battle to win. So there might be different ways that you approach it depending on what, if they've broken the law, you're not going to go, oh, well, let's compromise, or I'll do nothing about that one. There will be no option but to force through your way, and that will be the way, because that's the right thing to do. And you may well need to take a decision, and it might not be a popular choice, but you're forcing the conflict to be finished by saying, no, policy is this, that's what we're going to do. But there are other situations where you might decide that actually you've got a range of tools that you can use, and you might want to try and come up with a problem-solving solution that means everybody gets what they want. And if you've got the time to negotiate that, then that might be the best option at the time, and you don't want to come down one way or another or force your opinion or do nothing. And then in some other cases, doing nothing might just be the easiest option and most appropriate option.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes, depending on what it is. I'll find a link for those. Is it 5 different? I vaguely remember from studying it at uni. I'll find a link and I'll put it in the show notes so people can read it.
Okay. Because I would say if you could suggest in that, if you're writing up about that one, you're talking about the fact that there are different approaches to dealing with conflict, and in any given situation you chose this one because blah, 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 then that gives you quite a nice example you can drop into that part of the form. And then you can talk about the role of colleagues and specialists by saying, if you're looking at what roles people can play in helping dissolve conflict, you want to be bringing in the right people to help you. So if you are going to do a collaborative approach where you're trying to get everybody what they want, and that might be eminently possible to do, if you've got the right specialists in the room who can come up with a solution, that's going to be much better for you than if you and the account manager, who really don't understand any of the technical details, are trying to thrash out the solution. So bringing in the right people to have those conversations to help you get to the result that you want could be helpful.
Yes, that makes sense. And then, so once you've done all that, the next competency is to monitor the extent to which conflict management measures are successful. So that's an interesting one, because obviously your conflict, the method you used may have actually been to back down. So that, I don't really know how you measure how successful that was.
Well, I think what it looks like in real life is that you don't just implement a one-touch solution. I suppose it does very much depend on what the conflict was that you were dealing with. But I'd say, is the situation better now you've done something? Even if you're doing something was making an active decision to not do anything or not take any action at this point. So you're looking to ensure the fire is properly out over the longer term. And I think you can do that by just keeping a listening ear. So did you really squash that complaint, or is something still bubbling on between those two colleagues? I think you can also in this section talk about how you apply what you've learnt to new conflicts so that you can evidence continuous improvement. So for example, if you've tried a technique and it didn't work with the particular colleague, so say somebody is always late, you thought you'd take an approach by taking them out for coffee one morning and explaining the impact that it's having on the rest of the team and asking them to buck up their ideas, and it had absolutely no effect, and there was still conflict because everybody else still grumbled about the fact this person was late, then you're not going to do it again.
No.
Next time you're in a similar situation, or next time you're a different situation but the same person, that's evidencing your continuous learning and to the extent which your conflict management measures are successful, because they weren't, and so you're going to try something different. So I think it's about making sure you don't just hold one meeting and walk away thinking you've done your job, that you're trying to follow up with people later and making sure that the issue that they had raised or the situation that you found yourself in has actually been diffused appropriately, or maybe you need to do some kind of follow-up.
I think you've covered it quite thoroughly. So it also moves on to sort of how you support others with resolving the conflict.
I think this is a good one to have on the form, because if you're in a role where you are a program manager or in a department head kind of role, you'll be looking to support your colleagues, your direct reports, with helping them resolve conflicts on their projects and in their teams. So I think this is about coming up with an example of where you've mentored someone or coached someone where you're supporting them and they're struggling with conflict in their project. And everything we've talked about, all the tools, the techniques, the tips, the conflict strategies, all of that still applies, but you're just explaining it through I sat down with so-and-so, I gave them some tips on how best to approach this situation. Then I followed up with them after they'd had their conversation with the two stakeholders, and we realised we needed to do more on this, so I supported, that's backing people up.
And what I quite like about the idea of that is, I suppose, it's that idea that, because I'm still quite young and I like to run in there, and it's the fact that you don't need to run into each conflict and just help. Sometimes you do just need to sit down with somebody who's part of the conflict and say, oh, well, have you tried to look at it this way, and just indirectly influence the situation.
Yes, definitely. I think the more that you can do in that, I was going to use the word sneaky, but I don't think that's really appropriate. But the off the record type
it's
conversations.
Not behind anyone's back. It's just it's conversations.
It's having that open, trustworthy conversation where you're just getting your points across without having to say, right, we're going to have a conflict workshop to address the challenges between the two different stakeholder groups. We're going to come together. I'm going to facilitate a big discussion, because instantly people will walk into that room and hate the fact that they have to be there. So the more you can do kind of off the record.
Take them for a coffee.
Exactly.
That sort of thing. So we're on to the last two. We've got respond appropriately and promptly to conflict situations where intervention is required.
For me, this is about giving an example where you've diffused a situation where it's happening right now in front of you. There's some of the other things we've talked about have been, you've noticed that there might be a potential conflict between stakeholder groups around the delivery timescales or what's going to be delivered at the end. And you can work before that becomes a big deal to try to make sure everyone's on the same page. But this one, I think, is where you basically walk into the office and there's a massive fight going on, or you're in a meeting and there's an argument. So how do you deal with that? And I think this question gives you the opportunity to talk about where you've been in that situation. You're in the middle of a heated discussion. You're probably not in a position to go, let me just evaluate all the different conflict management techniques available to me and I'm going to choose the right one. So you're looking at quicker ways that you can diffuse a situation, and starting off with an apology is always a really good thing. So you just say, I'm sorry you feel like that. I'm sorry that happened. I'm sorry my team made you react in that way. That's not my intention. It's quite hard to be angry with someone who's apologising to you. So if you've ever had to be in that situation or done that kind of thing, that would be a good example. It's also quite hard to be angry with someone who agrees with you. So, another way to, and I've used this, you're completely right. We should have picked it up in testing. Oh, absolutely agree with everything that you've said. And, what can I do to make that right for you? Or let me go away. I'll find out some more information. I'll come back to you within the hour, as long as you actually do it.
Yes. Yeah.
So all the kind of things that, that feel like they're customer service. Because if you've got somebody who's in your face shouting, or you've got two stakeholders who are fighting it out, not literally, obviously, because we don't do that in a workplace, but who are having a strongly worded conversation in one of your project board meetings or something, you want to know when to say, actually, take this offline. I'm going to organise a separate conversation about that, because I think that's not really one of our agenda points today. So diffuse, remove, and then follow up quite quickly so that it doesn't get worse while you're waiting.
Yes.
Things like even simple things like knowing when to pick up the phone and have a conversation with someone and take a conversation off email.
Yeah.
Or if you do a lot of work on virtual tools and you can sense that something is just building, you say, right, we're not talking about that on the chat tool anymore. Let's all get on the phone. That is promptly dealing with conflict when it's happening in front of you.
And that is quite hard to tell when you're sort of on instant messenger or email. Sometimes you don't always notice quite in time when someone else is getting annoyed, or it's quite hard to tell how they feel about the situation.
Yes, I think it is. But I think as soon as you know that you can tell when the switch has flipped, because the messages become shorter and ruder and there's no smiley faces anymore.
Or too many smiley faces.
Yes, the sarcasm face and things. So it's being able to read the situation and act quickly. I think if you could come up with an example that describes how you've responded in that kind of situation, then I think you'd be hitting the brief for that competency.
Cool. So the last one is resolved conflict, giving due respect to the views, opinions and concerns of all parties. So that's quite a big one.
It is, and it's also quite difficult to write this down because you'd like to think that we do this all the time in every facet of project management, is respecting the diversity that we have within the teams. So it's to be able to come up with an example where you have given that due respect. You might just find any example. You could argue any example is where you've done and acted in a professional way. But I think it's about having in mind the basic principle of respecting diversity and not expecting everybody to have the same approach to you, to the way that they manage their work, to the way they deal with risk, to the way they report project status, any of that stuff. And especially if you've got a multicultural team, or you're working with overseas contractors or third-party offshoring, the more you understand about people's cultures, the more they can share with you about what's important to them and their ways of working, the more you can try to head off any conflicts that might happen as a result of misunderstandings around that. But when you're trying to respect the views and opinions and concerns of all parties, it's about good listening. It's what you were saying earlier, don't go in with the preconceived ideas, create the win-win solutions. Oh, that sounds like total buzzwords, doesn't it? But it's trying to say well, I know what you think already, so I don't have to listen to what you want to say. No. I'm going to listen to you because I've never met you before. But the making sure everybody gets equal airtime, and making sure that you listen to the concerns of others and then address them rather than just listen and then go, yeah, but I don't agree with you.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I think one big thing is that I know win-win situations are a bit of a buzzword, but a lot of situations you go, no, one of us is going to have to lose out. But actually, it is worth spending that little bit more time listening to everyone and trying to work out actually if there is a solution where everyone wins.
And often there is.
Yes.
Because I think often we don't spend enough time working out what the root cause of the problem is. And if you know why people are asking for what they're asking for, or why people are reacting the way that they are, it's often with very legitimate reasons behind. Like, I'm fighting for this particular functionality because it's really going to improve the user experience, and you are telling me I have to take it out. And then the person who's telling you to take it out also really wants great user experience and wants great user feedback. So as long as if you both start talking in the same language, there might be something that, we take out a different feature instead and we keep that one, but then everybody gets what they want and we get the good customer experience. So I've just picked that off the top of my head. It's probably not the best example, but the more you look at what's driving the conflict and not what the headlines are, the more likely it is that you'll find a scenario that is at least a partial win for everybody.
Yes, yeah, that's the thing.
I mean, the main aim is to get everybody back to work because conflict takes up so much time. You really don't want to be spending all day negotiating between different stakeholders. So it's got to be a balance between spending 3 weeks digging into the solution to try and find a win-win for everybody, but actually unblocking the situation enough so that people can just crack on.
So we've come to the end of the conflict management competency. Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for your time.
No, you're very welcome. I hope that's been useful, and good luck to everybody who is going through this and applying for chartered status.
And thanks to our listeners. Bye.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to Sorrel's PM Times. If you want to find out more, look on Twitter at @times_PM, our website pmtimes.libsyn.com, join our Facebook group or add me on LinkedIn. Bye!